Hey guys, so come along as we head back down to Washington, D.C. to visit Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, whose life spanned from 1837 to 1908, served as the 22nd and 24th U.S. President, was known as a political reformer. He is the only president to date who served two non-consecutive terms and also the only Democratic president to win an election during the period of a Republican domination of the White House that stretched from Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 to the end of William Howard Taft's term in 1913. Cleveland worked as a lawyer and served as mayor of Buffalo, New York, and governor of New York State before assuming the presidency in 1885. His record in the Oval Office was mixed. Not regarded as an original thinker, Cleveland considered himself a watchdog over Congress rather than an initiator. In his second term, he agreed to many of his original supporters and seemed overwhelmed by the Panic of 1893 and the depression that followed. He declined to run for a third term. Stephen Grover Cleveland was born in Caldwell, New Jersey on March 18, 1837. He was the fifth of 9 children of Richard Falley Cleveland, whose life spanned from 1804 to 1853, a Presbyterian minister, and Anne Neal Cleveland, whose life spanned from 1806 to 1882. In 1841, the family moved to upstate New York, where Cleveland's father served several congressions before his death in 1853. Did you know Grover Cleveland vetoed twice as many congressional bills as all 21 of the presidents who preceded him combined? 414 vetoes in his first term. Cleveland left school following his father's death and started working in order to help support his family. Unable to afford a college education, he worked as a teacher in a school for the blind in New York City, and then as a clerk in a law firm in Buffalo, New York. After clerking for several years, Cleveland passed the state bar examination in 1859. He started his own law firm in 1862. Cleveland did not fight in the American Civil War when the Conscription Act was passed in 1863. He paid a Polish immigrant to serve in his place. Cleveland's first political office was Sheriff of Erie County, New York, a position he assumed in 1871 during his 2-year term. He carried out the death sentence by hanging of 3 convicted murderers. In 1873, he returned to his law practice. He was persuaded to run for mayor of Buffalo in 1881. As a reformer of a corrupt city government, he won the election and took office in 1882. His reputation as an opponent of machine politics grew so rapidly that he was asked to run as the Democratic candidate for governor of New York. Cleveland became governor in January of 1883. He was so opposed to unnecessary government spending that he vetoed 8 bills sent up by the legislature in his first 2 months in office. While Cleveland was popular with the voters, he made enemies within his own party, particularly the powerful Tammany Hall political machine in New York City. However, he won the respect of New York State Assemblyman and future U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt and other reform-minded Republicans. Cleveland was soon regarded as presidential material. Cleveland won the Democratic presidential nomination in 1884 in spite of the opposition of Tammany Hall. The 1884 presidential campaign was ugly. Cleveland's Republican opponent, U.S. Senator James G. Blaine of Maine, was implicated in several financial scandals, while Cleveland was involved in a paternity case in which he admitted he had paid child support in 1874 to a woman who claimed he was the father of her child. In spite of the scandal, Cleveland won the election with the support of the Mugwumps, Republicans who considered Blaine corrupt. Once in office, Cleveland continued the policy of his predecessor, Chester Arthur, in basing political appointments in merit rather than party affiliation. He tried to reduce government spending using the veto more often than any other president up to that point. Cleveland was a non-interventionalist on foreign policy and fought to have protective tariffs lowered. In 1886, Cleveland married Frances Folsom, whose life spanned from 1864 to 1947, a student at Wells College in New York, who was 27 years his junior, which means pretty much 27 years younger than him. Although Cleveland was not the first president to marry while in office, he was the only one who had the ceremony in the White House. At the age of 21, Frances became the youngest First Lady in history. The Clevelands would go on to have 5 children. The tariff issue came back to haunt Cleveland and the presidential election of 1888. Former U.S. Senator Benjamin Harris of India won the election in large part because of heavy turnout by voters in the industrial states of the Northeast, which saw their jobs threatened by lower tariffs. Cleveland even lost his home state of New York in that election. He returned to New York City and took a position in a law firm for the next 4 years. Unlike the campaign of 1884, the presidential campaign of 1892 was quite quiet and restrained. President Harris, whose wife, Catherine Harris, was dying of tuberculosis, did not campaign personally, and Cleveland followed suit. Cleveland won the election in part because voters had changed their mind about high tariffs. Also because Tammany Hall decided to throw its support behind him. Now, I'm not quite sure exactly how to pronounce it, but it's spelled Tammany. Cleveland's second term, however, opened with the worst financial crisis in the country's history. Panic of 1893 began with railroad bankruptcy in February of 1893, followed rapidly by bank failures, nationwide credit crisis, and a stock market crash, and the failure of 3 more railroads. Unemployment rose to 19%, and a series of strikes crippled the coal and transportation industries. In 1894, the American economy did not recover until 1896 to 1897, when the Klondike Gold Rush and the Yukon touched off a decade of rapid growth. Cleveland was inconsistent in his social views. On one hand, he opposed discrimination against the Chinese immigrants in the West. On the other, he did not support equality for African Americans or voting rights for women. And he thought Native Americans should assimilate into mainstream society as quickly as possible, rather than preserve their own cultures. He also became unpopular with organized labor when he used federal troops to crush the Pullman Railroad strike in 1894. Cleveland was an honest and hard-working president, but he was criticized for being unimaginative and have no overreaching vision for American society, opposed to using legislation to bring about social change. He is best known for strengthening the executive branch of the federal government in relation to Congress. By the fall of 1896, Cleveland had become unpopular with some factions in his own party. Other Democrats also, however, wanted him to run for a third term, as there was no term limit for presidents at that time. Cleveland decided, and former U.S. Representative William Jennings Bryan of Nebraska won the nomination. Bryan, who later became famous as an opponent of British naturalist Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, lost the 1896 election to Governor William McKinley of Ohio. After the White House in 1897, Cleveland retired to his home in Princeton, New Jersey, and served as a trustee of Princeton University from 1901 until his death. He refused overtures from his party to run again for presidency in 1904. His health had begun to fail rapidly at the end of 1907, and he died of a heart attack at the age of 71 on June 24th, 1908. According to two of Cleveland's biographers, his last words were, "I have tried so hard to do right." And with that, I will see you all in the next one.